everybody. Thank you for coming out on this cooler morning. I'm pretty excited that I'm not sweating by 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's always a plus. I would welcome all of you to be here. I'm really excited to have this meeting again. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from the last meeting. So I will take a motion or discussion about any changes that need to happen. And if you're making a motion, say your name so that we can record it properly. Russ.
My name is Russ Kirkman. I make a motion to approve the last meeting minutes.
Fantastic. Is there a second? Second.
Eileen Burke, second.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Any more discussion, any changes? Ken, you're silent? I'm impressed. That's really great. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, fantastic. All right, well now I'm really excited to hear more about the West Hickman Watershed Management Plan. Personally or professionally, Blue Ash Green Source has done more work in West Hickman recently, and I think it's because of the great work that the nonprofit is doing, and then the concentration on West Hickman. So I'm really excited to hear the plan. We're going to have the next steps, and then from Stephanie Blaine and John Pike from Palmer Engineering. So you have the floor.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Blaine. I work with Palmer Engineering and served as the project manager for the West Hickman Watershed Management Plan. So this is something that we've been working on, as in Palmer Engineering has been involved for about 4 years, but the city of Lexington had been, started forming it a long time before that. So I'm sure most of you all are aware of the location of it. It's sort of located in the southern portion of Fayette County. It does extend down into Jessamine County. LFUCG paid for this watershed management plan creation using their own funds. So we tried to reach out some to Jessamine County, but most of the project was focused in the Fayette County portion. I do want to introduce John Pike. He works with me at Palmer Engineering. He is one of my lead designers on our water quality projects and was heavily involved in this watershed management plan creation. So he'll probably try to keep me on track and tell me all the things that I've forgotten. John got so excited about this, he's now involved in the Hickman Creek Conservancy, which I think is great when we have personal connections to projects we're working on and then stay involved with them after our professional portion of it are complete. So sort of the project history, I just talked about this a little bit, but in 2017, LFUCG worked to create the West Hickman Watershed Council. So that was a group of interested parties that were located in the watershed, business owners, residents, people with specific concerns in the West Hickman watershed. Out of that, they were able to have enough interest to form the Hickman Creek Conservancy, which is a nonprofit that most recently has done a lot of work in West Hickman, but it's also available to do work in East Hickman. So it's both the sub-watersheds are included in their work. LFUCG and Kentucky Division of Water partnered to collect all of the stream sampling data. I'm guessing there are folks in this room that sampled out at West Hickman. So there are, we use the watershed focused monitoring data to develop our pollutant loads and to do all of our calculations. So we didn't collect any new water quality data that wasn't already available. I do want to recognize that Kentucky Division of Water did help because I think, as most of you all are probably aware, the watershed-focused efforts completed by LFUCG is only a part of the year during the spring, summer, and early fall portions. So the Division of Water came in and collected samples at many of the same sampling sites, not all the outfall locations, only the stream sampling sites from October through April. So that occurred in 2019 and early in 2020. We were selected to write the watershed management plan in fall 2019, so that's when my involvement with the project began. And as with a lot of things in 2020, COVID happened and sort of changed sort of the trajectory of our project a little bit. We had hoped to be able to move a little bit quicker than we were, but there were a lot of delays. We didn't receive the bulk of the sampling until September of 2020. We were originally supposed to receive that in May of 2020 and didn't get all of the macroinvertebrate data until well into 2021. So there was a lot of slowdowns there. Once we had that data, we spent most of 2021 calculating loads, identifying potential projects in the watershed, and then estimating what load reductions we could potentially see from some of those projects to try to get the pollutants down to the projected benchmarks. So as of February 1st, 2022, we submitted the full draft. I think there's 152 proposed projects in the West Hickman watershed. So all the proposed projects were included. The full draft was submitted to the Division of Water in February 2022. There was a little bit of a delay in getting the project approved or the plan approved by the EPA. There was some turnover at the Division of Water. It was a large plan with a lot of projects, and it wasn't tied to a 319 grant. Most of their watershed management plans that they get approval are tied to that, and they have a technical advisor. This one was a little bit unique in that instance, so I think that maybe slowed things up a little bit because they didn't have a specific person that was assigned to reviewing that. But we went back and forth about a couple of comments, and then we finally were able to get the plan approved by the EPA in June of this year. So we are good to go and ready to start, hopefully, implementation. So that's where we want to talk a little bit about where we were and then how hopefully people in this room could start implementing some of the projects that we have outlined in the plan. So as I mentioned, the plan was completely funded by LFUCG, so it wasn't part of a 319 grant, but we did follow all of the grant requirements in terms of how the process needed to go and to get the plan approved by the EPA so that the projects in the plan can be used or can be applied for 319 grants to implement those. So all the projects may be eligible for the LFUCG Water Quality Incentive Grants and then also the 319 grant funding. I don't know if anyone in here would be interested in applying for those. They've changed up the application process a little bit. You used to have to submit by December, initial packet, and then they'd shortlist basically, and they'd invite you to submit a full proposal. They've changed that up a little bit now where we just have to submit basically like a letter of interest, and then a full package is due in February. So it's a little bit different than previous process. I think they changed that a year or two ago if you haven't applied for one recently. So as part of this, we looked at what our proposed goals were. So in watershed planning, we identified overarching goals for the entire watershed. So we had 4 main goals that we based our entire plan around. So the first one was to improve water quality for aquatic life and recreational uses. The second one was to improve stream and riparian zone habitat to support a healthy aquatic and terrestrial ecosystem. The third was to increase environmental awareness in the community and provide educational resources about improving the watershed to area residents. And fourth was to improve aesthetic appeal of the stream corridors and waterways to encourage engagement with nature. So these were our overarching goals that we then identified a set of objectives. So I won't read all these, but once we get down to the objective level, we're looking at measurable items. So each one of these objectives will hopefully help us achieve one of those 4 goals. So we get in there specific, looking at, specific levels of reductions of different pollutants, looking at, expanding riparian zones by a certain amount, And this is something that we worked closely with both the West Hickman Watershed Council. We had a series of public meetings concerning that. Also with the Division of Environmental Services, Demetria wasn't able to be here today, but she and my team met multiple times to try to figure out things that might be achievable and that were specific. So here are the first four. I believe, if I remember correctly, there are 13 total. So then we're moving into this second set of proposed objectives. Some of them we looked at based off of, talking about native plants through the watershed with a minimum of 1 acre of additional area per year. Looking at, some of them are based on timelines, doing like a minimum of 1 project every 5 years. So there were several different metrics that we used. Oh, I forgot 9. So I'll put these up here. Some of the objectives were in relation to community engagement and even community recreation. So that plays into a lot of what we hope the Hickman Creek Conservancy and then other groups in the watershed can help promote some of those events and can be available for the additional funding with the approval of this plan. So this chart just shows basically our 13 objectives and our 3 goals and how sort of they align. That was something that we wanted to make sure that each one of our objectives helped us achieve specifically one of our goals. So get down to the fun part. I know there's some people, other folks in here that have done the data analysis part of the watershed management plan before. We had a lot of data in this watershed, a lot of data. Normally the other ones I've worked on, I'm just used to having stream sites, but then to have all the outfall data that's collected during the watershed focus plan was a great resource, but was also overwhelming to try to look at how all those numbers interacted together. So the first challenge was combining the LFUCG data and the KDOW data. If you've ever gotten data from KDOW before, they keep it in an Access database and they export it in a manner that was very different than all of our other data. So that in itself took some manipulation to try to get that so that all of our data was in comparable formats. We calculated average yearly pollutant loads. Then we calculated the benchmarks on the average loads. We estimated the pollutant loads that were needed for reduction. And then finally, we got into identifying the projects and the BMPs needed to meet those reductions in each subwatershed. So this was a little bit of a unique watershed in terms of watershed planning. There's not a whole lot of other plans that have been approved in Kentucky that are in such urban areas. So, a lot of the other projects that I've worked on are talking about cattle exclusion fencing and secondary water sources and those more agricultural and livestock BMPs. And so really we have none of those here. So trying to meet those load reductions was a challenge. And in areas where we were seeing loads and there's not anything obvious, trying to think, okay, is there, what else could this possibly be? So I'll go through the data just a little bit. So we were looking at prioritizing watersheds. We looked at the amount of load reductions that were needed to meet benchmark conditions. This is very similar to a lot of the data that Third Rock has done in the past. This is a little bit different in the fact that we combined both the watershed-focused monitoring data that was collected by LFUCG and all the data from Kentucky Division of Water. So if you see maps that are in the watershed-focused monitoring presentations, these will be a little bit different because we're meshing those together. Some of those were a little bit interesting because most of the watershed, well, really all the watershed-focused monitoring that LFUCG does is during the summer months. So we combined it in with the data that was collected by the Division of Water during the winter months. So as you can see, the E. coli was high in most of the watershed, which is sort of what we expected. Some of this was an interesting watershed because when the data was collected, there were still multiple RMP projects, the remedial measures projects that are a part of the consent decree that were not completed. So there was known issues with the sanitary sewer system that Lexington had already committed to remedying. And being able to try to come up with estimating what kind of load reductions, both bacteria-wise and nutrient-wise, that we may be able to expect from those. So some of our areas were clearly identified as higher loading, and there was known SSOs in those areas. But then there were some other areas that we had to look at coming up with some other new BMPs to include in this plan. Here's a similar graph for the nutrients. As you can see, this is, it was primarily in the lower portions of the watershed. One thing that we ran into on this was that the benchmark conditions for nutrients were lower than what the discharge limits for the treatment plant are. And so we showed some increased levels of required reductions, even though the plant is, nothing we collected, or well, I guess we didn't collect, but nothing that was collected exceeded the permit limits. It just doesn't all the way align with the benchmarks that Lexington uses for nitrogen and phosphorus. So that was sort of a challenge down in that lower portion of the watershed where the treatment plant is located. So that's sort of the areas that we wanted to make sure that it was clear that this was not a regulatory discharge issue in terms of releasing flows that weren't in compliance with the permit. Based off the benchmark condition, the TSS was actually the lowest pollutant of concern. We had a couple areas you can see that were identified that was had some hot spots for higher levels of TSS. So once we had all this data, we came in and we prioritized the watersheds. Won't get into all the nitty-gritty details. I have to thank John for this. He sort of came in and I said, come up with a metric. And something that Demetria really challenges us with is she really wanted a metric that could be easily explained on how we came up with a watershed prioritization. So it's a little bit complicated, but if you want the details, they're all in the report. But a lot of factors were assigned specific numeric values, and then those values were averaged. So that we had, it was more than just a, well, I feel like this one is, or this one, you know, was a numeric calculation. So the highest priority areas are, we named our sub-watersheds by numbers, so that's what these numbers are. I didn't explain that. But WH16, which is the Lansdowne and Zandale area, WH10, which is Stony Brook and Brigaden, WH22, Idle Hour, and then WH8, the Wilson Downing Road area. So, where are we now? I mentioned before we have 152 proposed BMPs. So there are a lot of options. There's a lot of work that we think could help benefit this watershed. And we have created a map that's hosted on the Hickman Creek Conservancy website. So this map, there is a photo of, or a, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Ooh, that's fancy. That is shown down here, and basically each one of the little dots you see there is an approximate project location, and I'll come back to this. Well, is approximate project location, and you can click on each one of those dots and it gives you more information about what's proposed on that project. So it includes you know, ones that Lexington is already committed to doing through the remedial measures program. It includes specific ones where we're looking at you know, we really could do something else with this detention basin. We could increase infiltration. We could plant some native plants. So some of them are very site-specific, but then others of them are more general on there and just looking at general areas. The full plan is available on the LFPCG website. Is it on, Melissa? Is it up on the Division of Water? I don't know if it's up yet there. I haven't checked. Okay. That's okay. It's on Lexington's website, so if you want to see it, you can go there. And then just to note that participation is voluntary. So this is not a regulatory document where someone's going to come in and, you know, the EPA is not intended to come in and say, okay, you have these objectives. You said once every 5 years you want to do a stream restoration project. You don't meet that. This is more of a guidance document, and we're really just setting goals to try to work towards rather than compliance issues. So proposed project breakdown. These are the main categories and the symbols that are shown on the map. So we, you know, range from having basin retrofits. That's one of the things in this area that I'm sure most of you know that Lexington has all of their basins mapped. And so we went through, I guess, the list of those and looked at ones that were in areas of specific high loading. We actually calculated the drainage area to each one of those basins and looked at, you know, if we do some modifications to those, you know, instead of having concrete lined ditches in the bottom, do we have something that's more natural that could, you know, promote infiltration? Will that potentially have an impact on the watershed? We looked at some of the projects are just tree planting, so, you know, low-cost things that can be done by individual homeowners even. You know, and then there's higher ones, stream restorations that are, you know, have a higher capital cost. So the list of all those projects are included on the map. We did have one for dam removal, which I think Lexington currently has already initiated the process and has selected a consultant to work on removing the dam at Veterans Park and doing some bank stabilization associated with that. So I was excited to see that, you know, the first, you know, a large project that was on our list was already being pushed forward. So this is a close-up of what the map looks like. So in our plan, all of the BMPs that were recommended for implementation, they each have, maybe, oh. They each have a BMP number. So like this BMP is 20-07. The first number indicates what sub-watershed it's in, and then they're just numerically ordered after that. The type is listed, so this is a riparian vegetation BMP type, and then the approximate longitude, latitude, and then we have some, a description of what sort of our initial ideas were. These are pretty broad to try to allow for people to be able to come in and sort of initiate the specific situations that we think could best make work. Our goal was to try not to be limit what could be done, but that allow for, you know, innovation and creativity as these projects are actually implemented into the watershed. So then below that, it has the impairment and pollutants that are addressed for each one of the projects. So this is one that was like identified for a trash removal that through our public meeting process. There was identified areas where there's large collections of trash, so very similar, and that one's in W07. And then when you list on there, it'll tell you like the sanitary projects, all of the RMP projects that were, some of these are now approaching construction or under construction, but what the projects' names are, and then it will actually show you where those projects are located and what the last estimated costs were. I think these costs were all done pre-COVID, so subject to change.
The reason why that didn't add up to 152 is some of the projects don't have a GPS coordinate associated with them. They're more of like a broad educational BMP, so That's just, if you notice it didn't add up to 152, that's why.
Thanks, John. John's in charge of our map. So I'll let, as I mentioned, John is now helping, obviously on the consulting side, but is now involved in the Hickman Creek Conservancy. So did want to make sure everyone here was aware of some of the things the Hickman Creek Conservancy can help with as a partner in this project.
Yep, Stephanie's right. I just couldn't bear, I live in West Hickman, so I just couldn't bear to set the project aside, so I joined Hickman Creek Conservancy to continue participating and hopefully start implementing some of these projects. So Hickman Creek Conservancy has meetings every third Thursday of the month at 5:30, typically in the Tates Creek Public Library, and everybody here is welcome to come to any of those meetings. We would love support and technical advisement if you're interested. So Hickman Creek is hoping to be a liaison to explain and promote to the community what the ideas in this plan are and how and what resources the people in the community have to engage with this plan and implement some of those projects. So we are a nonprofit who can help to garner some of the funding available to us at our meetings and at separate events that we do, such as trash pickups and creek critters. We call it creek critters, but it's kind of like a macroinvertebrate survey without us following the rules. We asked for volunteers to help us with some trash pickup events targeting some of those trash areas we identified on the maps. And we also have equipment storage tools with loppers and saws and trash bags and buckets and pickers all in my garage currently that we can provide to anyone who's in West East Hickman who's doing an activity like this. And we've also lately been trying really hard to partner with organizations, since all the water quality network in Lexington is a web, and we're trying to help each other and promote each other. So we were partnering with Bluegrass Trout Unlimited a lot, especially in the Veterans Park area. We're trying to reach out to neighborhood associations in West Hickman, and of course there's a lot of people here who represent organizations that we've been working with and have been reaching out to. So to communicate with Hickman Creek Conservancy, we have our website that we update every month with the meeting dates and any other miscellaneous activities we're putting on. This upcoming couple of months, we're participating in the Nature Hop event and Lexington's Tree Week. Friends of Jacobson Park, if anyone has heard about that, it's a new group that's been created by Katie Lindemann, who's involved with Palmer Engineering, so that's how we met, and she's been really active and really excited about Jacobson Park. They're doing a planting event later this month.
September 23rd.
Yep, September 23rd. I don't have it remembered because I know it's on the Hickman Creek website for me to check whenever I need it. So if anyone's interested in that, you can contact Katie Lindemann, or you can contact Hickman Creek Conservancy email. I've just been inviting the people who have come to previous meetings, so if you're interested in hearing information from us, you can email me or email Hickman Creek to get on our email list. And also that map that she mentioned, here, I'll point to it. If you go to the website on this, at the top bar, one of them says West Hickman Creek or WH Planning. You go to that one and click on that link and scroll down, the map will be right there for you to peruse and review at your convenience.
And the intent is to hopefully keep that map updated. So as specific projects are constructed, to note that so that we can keep a record of sort of what's been done in the watershed. So if you know of things that the Hickman Creek Conservancy or LFCG may not know of, if there's a neighborhood tree planting event or something like that, those are kind of things that we want to try to keep track of so that we can see what kind of work is being done to try to help meet our objectives, and then be able to assess, are these objectives working the way that we had hoped they would, or do we need to make adjustments? As part of the document, we have to suggest a time to reevaluate the plan. And one of the big things in this watershed was the impact that the remedial measures program is going to have on it. And it's sort of a very hard thing to estimate. So we had suggested that once all those projects are done, that we look at a 2 to 3 year period after that to sort of allow things to stabilize a little bit, and then maybe try to do a reassessment at that point, just because there are so many projects there that could be impacting our water quality. So that, I know that the folks over at DWQ are working hard on getting those done. Actually have some involved. I'm on that basin team too, so it's all sort of integrated for me. I'm working on the sewer in that area as well, so something that's near and dear to my heart. I guess that's about all that I had prepared to say. If there are any questions or comments, Mr. Cook.
I'm keenly interested in that math product. I think that's legion in terms of how you presented that. What software platform are you using for that?
It's an ArcGIS.
ArcGIS. And where is that data housed? Is that on
It's actually,
SRI's server, or is that on a Palmer?
it's on a Palmer server right now. We had sort of, as part of our sort of just, because of John and my, interest in the watershed, Palmer's allowing us just sort of as a, donation and partner in the project to host that on our website right now. It can be moved eventually if it needs to be, that becomes the case. The updating of that map is being done through Hittman Creek Conservancy. So John's working on that through that nonprofit organization. But it was something that we included in our initial contract to create the map. It sort of came out of the fact that we were in COVID. We couldn't have public meetings. So we were trying to figure out a way that we could communicate the level of data. We tried to hold, Zoom public meetings and just weren't getting a whole lot of involvement. And so we were trying to have a way that people could access the data when it was convenient for them, when they wanted to just look at like what was in their specific neighborhood. And so that was sort of an idea that we came up with to try to, promote the project during a time when we couldn't have, typical public communications.
The symbology that you created for each of the project types and the format and the data format, I think that's applicable to the other watershed plans that are being done. And it concerns me that it's on a private corporation's website. How long does your contract go?
I believe that it's actually on
Is it
one of our employees' accounts.
No, it's on our whole server, I think. So right now we need to probably figure out something. Right now it's something that Palmer is committed to hosting until there is another place to do it, holding it. So it's not something that we're getting paid. It's not really part of our contract. It's just something that we created that I, as the project manager, feel is an important tool and have committed to holding on until there is another place that it can be served.
Multiple people have access to edit it, and that can be shared and communicated to anyone as is needed.
I'm pointing at the HCC president. Are you still president? Okay. And asking if he has access to make updates.
I can email him the password. Yeah.
Well, and it's something that, ideally as, if we're looking at modifying, updating other watershed management plans or creating other ones, it'd be great, if, Lexington has a lot of mapping, and it's probably something that could be, definitely could be hosted by Lexington. It just, we haven't gotten who would be in charge of it that would, right now we have a vested interest, so we're doing it, for lack of better. So it's mine and John's volunteers.
Go ahead.
Russ.
I was going to also, comment that I thought the interactive map was great, especially for and all that. I think the city got a really good return on investment.
Thank you.
Y'all bring exceptional value with this project, going well above and beyond. Has there been any conversations in terms of having these proposed, all voluntary, but proposed BMPs on this, looking at,
any indication that LAUSD would continue to support BNPs that are either identified
Yes.
or would substantially help address
Yes, so
diminishing watershed plans?
initially, we were looking at the Veterans Park Dam project was sort of a low-hanging fruit because it was, A, a visible project, B, something that's sort of a known issue, and C, something that had already been preliminarily studied. And so our initial intent was to submit for 319, or this, I shouldn't say ours. The city's initial intent was to submit for 319 funding to do that project. They were able to get cleaner water money through the feds to be able to design that project without a 319 grant. I think there is commitment, talking to DES, that they do hope to, in the future, submit additional 319 grants to start implementing maybe a few of the larger projects, and then hopeful that neighborhood associations, Hittman Creek Conservancy might look at doing some of the smaller ones that have now been identified.
Well, especially now that the plan's approved.
Right, now the plan's approved, so finally.
Yeah, foundation for support.
And Palmer Engineering, HCC, and DES specifically with Demetria have been in plans to host a public meeting related to this specifically. I think it'll be part of one of the upcoming Hittman Creek Conservancy. But I think Demetria has been really wrapped up with the dam project, so we've been holding on her to be ready to.
Yeah, we will have one more final public meeting where we present very similar to this presentation, probably a little bit less technical and more about the specific projects, and have some mapping for people, residents want to come and look at what's specifically in their area and aren't comfortable using the online map.
Has there been any conversations about if work that's identified in the plan, projects on the implementation side, if that would get any preferential scoring on stormwater incentive grants?
I just wrote that note down. I don't know that it's been
I was just,
talked about, but
yeah.
it's, unless you all talked about it, and not with Frank and I, but I did just write that note at the beginning of the presentation.
No, I was going to say, I know that something like Dimitri and I had mentioned talking, and we had not gone to the step of getting with Lindsay and Frank about that yet, but hopefully it would help a project scoring, even if it's not technically in the metric, to say this has been identified as something that's needed.
Or for any approved watershed management plan in the city.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lexington, and maybe I shouldn't say that. There was another, when the funding came through for Veterans Park, there was another project that was submitted for 319 funding this last cycle through LFECG, so in a different watershed, which I'm sure you probably know. Yes.
Gabe Hensley, Water Quality. I have an elementary question, but I need help connecting the dots on a watershed focused plan. So what are other than the obvious, like improvement in water quality, which is what we all want, what are the incentives to meeting the objectives? Like, what's that carrot out there for to participate in this? I know all of us are interested in water
Right.
quality over here, but does it help? Regulatory standpoint, does it help with anything? Like parts of our stormwater help us with, or is what from a government perspective or from an average citizen perspective, why do we need this? Why do we do this?
Right. So from a
other than the obvious.
to me, the most challenging is for the average citizen to convince people to care. I mean, still, I know a lot of these people spend a lot of time and effort trying to, educate the public of why water quality is important, and why we should make that a priority. So all those things are similar. So for the average homeowner, the thing that can make a difference, for commercial areas, like part of Nicholasville Road, the entire summit is in this area. So we have some about pervious pavers and those sort of things that could help lower a stormwater quality management fee by, going above and beyond the minimum regulations in the stormwater manual by implementing some of these measures within there. We've talked to folks over, I forget what the name of the center is, but where the, I was gonna say Bed Bath and Beyond is, but it's not even there anymore. What, the Crossroads, is that the name of it? What, we've talked to the owners of that, and they were really interested in, trying to implement some of these measures specifically related to reducing their impervious area to help with their stormwater quality management fees that are associated. So on the individual homeowners, residents, which, a large portion of this watershed is, it's talking about, safe water for their kids to play in, all the same things that we're promoting in general. As far as LFUCG, it can help meet some of our MS4 requirements in terms of public education and outreach. I know Abby always emails me and saying, what are your projects you've been doing when she's doing her reports for that reporting. We do have, as far as some of the areas that did have high E. coli loadings did not align with the known SSOs. So we've included several projects related to both investigating and repairing damaged laterals. So that's something that the city could potentially use to obtain additional federal funding towards where they are, doing some investigations on either, not the main trunk lines that are part of the RMP program, but that are collector lines or, going up to individual, up to the cleanouts where they have issues. Because we did see some of that in areas that didn't have identified RMP projects in them.
I'm going to chime in.
Yes.
With an addendum to what Stephanie just said. I'm with Hickman Creek Conservancy, and having been in several of these public information meetings, the people that come often, majority of them, are more concerned about water quantity than quality. They have a flooding issue in their backyard or on their street. Fortunately, these same DMPs that we can use to improve quality can impact that flooding. And so it's a big incentive for those people if they think they can get some relief from a flooding issue by, increasing infiltration, slowing down the volume of water that comes in a big event, that kind of thing. That's right now, that's probably our primary hook with a lot of those people is to say, yeah, we can't specifically address your flooding issue, but if we do some things that improve quality of the water, it's going to impact the quantity that you're seeing. So from a practical standpoint, that's probably where we're at right now. Like Stephanie said, it's tough to get a lot of people to show up and care, and really get information about improving water quality. They pretty much take it for granted that you flip the tap and good water is going to come out of that. So I think I just wanted to add that little note to what.
Thanks, Kelly.
I think we've about exceeded our time, but this is really important to us, and we'd love to have more conversations about it. So please contact Stephanie or Hickman Creek, or come to one of the Hickman Creek meetings, and we'd love to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well, I've been very impressed with Hickman Creek Conservancy. In the short while you all have been around, it seems like you've done a lot of really, really great work and got a lot of engagement from the community, which is hard, as we just talked about. Another thing that will help with getting people involved is creating the next generation of watershed professionals. So I would like to welcome Dr. Argaritis to come up from UK and talk to us about it. I didn't realize you were sitting next to me or behind me. Well, thank you.
Just a reminder, sorry, there are mics in front of everybody. I'm sorry I didn't make this announcement before, but when you ask questions, if you could hit the voice button so we can hear it in the recording. My bad, I'm not saying that before, but that'll just help us be able to hear each other in the recording. Sorry.
All right, well, good morning, everyone. As As we mentioned, I'm Carmen Agrides, so I am the Senior Associate Dean here at the Martin Gatton College of Agriculture, Food and Environment at the University of Kentucky. I have not been as involved as where I was with some of the extension work for the past couple of years, but I am going to present a lot of the stuff I was doing quite a bit. And looking around the room at the folks that are here, I see a lot of our partners in a lot of these efforts as well. So I know there's going to be details that they can also help fill in place as this. So within the university and our college, a big part of what we do, and you've kind of alluded a lot to this educational mission, but we also have this research and outreach mission as well. And so I'm taking this opportunity to talk about not just one of the recent projects that we've had funded through the Stormwater Incentive Grant Program, but I also want to kind of showcase some other things that are happening around campus so that if you are on there, you know, maybe for the football game or whatever it may be, if you're walking around, you can kind of see a little bit of that history and what we're doing. So one of the things within our college and what the university we do is we're very much a experiential type learning system. So we like a lot of that hands-on learning component, and a big part is we think students, outreach to people, public, K through 12, adult learners, whatever it may be, learn a little bit better if they can actually touch it, they can do it, they can participate in it. So we have a lot of farms, research farms around the state, some North Farm local or South Farm, a lot of you might be familiar with, they can get out to, Robinson Forest in Eastern Kentucky, but on campus we didn't have as much, right? So there was fewer opportunities for people to actually be able to walk out of the classroom, walk to a spot on campus and be able to do something with it. So some of these projects that we're going to kind of show you through have kind of changed that and evolved that to where we have a lot more spaces where our students can actually go out and do work in that area. And I'll show you some of these. So when I would teach my stream restoration class, for instance, we have a lot of opportunities now where we can actually go out into the field and do those sort of things. The same thing with our extension. There's also, as an added bonus, and Kevin will tell you here, because of our MS4 permit, it also helps us meet some of the requirements of that as well about engaging our citizens that we have on campus. So Lindsay has a PDF copy of all these, but I put some QR codes in here because we have a few story maps that might also give a little bit of extra information along the way. And then there's just some different links. And then I have a lot of clickable links through some of these as well that folks can get a little bit as we go. But the first one I'm going to kind of walk through is the more recent project that we had done, and Russ was part of this project as well, and Kevin, was on our unnamed trip to Hickman Creek that we have. And so this one involved a lot of different partners. Stantec helped us part of the design. We had Ridgewater involved in construction, EcoGrow as well, Bell Engineering, and then a variety of different folks along the way. And again, this was funded by one of the LFUCG's Stormwater Incentive Grants Program. But we also kicked in, obviously, with our match. So UK's, we have students have a sustainability council. So the students really felt this was a worthwhile project and kicked $50,000 in from their funding from that. And then also some other various cost shares that came in with it. So let me do a little bit of orienting you, and I was really psyched about this button, so I'm really interested in doing this. All right, so the Arboretum, I'm guessing a lot of folks in this room have probably walked through the Arboretum. So that's going to kind of orient you there. If you can see in here, we have our softball stadium, our soccer, and baseballs in this way. So the project that we're looking at, and this is kind of an aerial of more recent, is where these reds are highlighted. So one part's going to be a bit of this bioswale, and the other part's going to be where the stream restoration was done. In a couple slides, I'm going to kind of show you how the water flows through here because it's a little bit interesting. So when we started to propose this, we wanted to do two of those parts because of how that water comes. So if you will notice on this stream here, we have the confluence that comes together. So one part of that confluence comes from a spring system that's up near the neighborhood back behind the softball. The other part was when Alumni Drive was reconfigured, when it was redone, because there was the next project, and Ken's very involved and knows about this one, where they had more of the infiltration basin work done, they realigned Alumni Drive. And part of the reason the road was split the way it was here was it decreases traffic speeds that come through that area. And they were, and also trying to fit in some of those basins. That's where we ended up. So what happens is water comes from this area where the athletic fields are, comes down, passes over one part of Alumni, then it will go down through where we put the bioswale before it passes back over Alumni to come down through this stream. So that's part of the reason that we had that put in place there. So as part of this project, we also looked at how do we enhance some of the hyperrheic area, and then also looking at some of the riparian part with it. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we're trying to do with this, besides not just addressing water quality. And we knew we were getting a very high volume of folks that come through here. I think we get somewhere in the order of at least 18,000 vehicles per day come through this area. We also wanted to use it as an education opportunity, not just from being across from the Arboretum, but being on campus is another location where our students and faculty and staff and so forth can go to. So the first part of the project that was done was putting in the bioswale in place. So again, it's in that little bit of that traffic island. And so in there, the idea with that was, I think, to add some treatment and also slow down a little bit of part of that water. So this is a little bit of that part where it's during that construction phase. So the idea would be, as you would expect, the water would infiltrate through that amended media that's in there, and then it would, when it passes out through before it goes back across, it would have some either reduction because of infiltration and or some treatment. And just a little bit of shot of that is, you know, is kind of going through. If you go out there now, you're going to see a lot more flowers around it, and this is still kind of a bit evolving through there. The other part was at the south part of that island, we put some trees in place. So we have our arborist, Stacy Borden, UK, who does a very fantastic job of finding opportunities to put trees in where he can. And so we did add some more trees in there that over time will grow, but also such a way that it's not going to impede when somebody comes out of the Arboretum. They're not going to be able to see traffic as they go through there. So that was the first phase that was done. And then the next part was kind of moving over to where the stream was at. So this is a shot of what it looked like before. It was an area that had a lot of concern for us, in part because it was very difficult to maintain it with grounds. Part of this area got really, really boggy and wet. There was opportunity there, I think, to really address some of that water quality. Again, we have our athletic fields and so forth back in there. And this is also in an area where there's stormwater management is part of some of our basin. But we also looked at this as a huge education opportunity, not just for the general public who may come by, because as we'll see in some other photos, there's a walking, running trail that goes right by this, but also the cars that go by, folks from the Arboretum that may come over, or again, we use this quite a bit in classes. So we'll kind of run through some photos here. So as you can imagine, it starts out and it doesn't look great. This is, again, a stream area that is not been probably loved as much as it should. But then as we go through a bit with the construction, and again, just to orient you, Arboretum, and then going this way would be leaving campus. So the first bit of it, you can kind of see the original stream was to excavate out part of that valley. So it's about, I think, a 30 or so width in there that got excavated out and armored in. So it gets replaced with some limestone material, some wood chips, soil in there to try to recreate a hyperrheic system where there's a lot more flow. So water can have more storage and more transient time within there. You can see a little bit of where the bioswale is still in there. The other thing I liked about this, and I applaud the construction on this, was there's a lot of recycling of materials in here. So we at UK, when they chip, if we have to do work where they chip trees or whatever, then those chips get used as landscaping, but a lot of those also got used in this in place. When we had wood that gets incorporated as snags in here, that's also part of that. And if I remember correctly, Russ, I think the rock came from Kentucky American when you all were doing some projects over there. So there was a lot of that recycling of materials involved as well within this. And the other part that I thought was kind of interesting, and this was something that we really wanted as part of that design, was, again, using that in education to show different types of restoration for students. So when we bring them out to the class, we see people doing things a little bit differently. We specifically asked, don't do a one style throughout the whole thing. Let's look at maybe some different styles and how they might connect. So at the top up here, this is where the confluence came in place. It was a little bit steeper in there. And what it does is it does, through this area here, does what we can think of more as maybe that regenerative or self-forming type of style. So this would be similar to what's behind the Montessori Middle School of Kentucky. So if you've ever been back there on that project, it's much more of that style where they kind of have that valley formed and let the stream kind of form itself as it goes through. And then the next section here mirrors more of a single thread of what was done near the section of Alumni Drive on UK that goes in between University and Nick Road. So that section of restoration project in there. So it's more of that single threaded type channel with some of the limestone walls in there. And then the last one, we asked for a bit more of a kind of a braided type of system to mimic a little bit closer to like the Hatchery Creek project over near Jamestown, to kind of be something that's more of those offshoot wetlands. And then in there, what we've done is there are paths where students can actually cross the creek and in a way help divide it up. So in one area, not only are we trying to do something to address water quality and quantity, but we're also trying to do something that's going to let us maximize educational opportunities with students. So you can take them out instead of having to drive a whole bunch of places across the state. You can go into one spot and talk through maybe some of the different philosophies about why folks did what they did. And just kind of give you a little bit more of an orientation of what that looks like. And we really appreciate the flowers. The flowers are always something we get numerous compliments about. But you can kind of see along the way just how that kind of blends in there a bit. And it's a little harder to see in here, but there are also a number of snags along the way that kind of got put in place for wildlife to get down. The other thing I would just kind of point out is this is not a really deep stream at all. And that was also intentional, knowing that we were going to have folks coming from the Arboretum and probably kids coming over to play. So this section of stream is not super deep by any means. And for us, that was also a bonus in the classroom because the section of stream that we'll look at in a little bit, closer to between University and Nick Road, closer to the football stadium, that one does have some really deep pools in it. So when we're doing classes out there, it's really hard to get students to be able to get in there and wade in the middle of class to do that. But what was really remarkable to me too is just going off an RBP is how big that's changed in a 3-year time. So we went from a 77 on the RBP score to 184 in a 3-year time from this project. And that I thought was, I was pretty excited about that. But besides having classes out there, this project was also part of a PhD study for one of our students out of our Earth and Environmental Science department. And so the link here will actually take you to her dissertation, so if you're interested in looking at that. And she did a variety of different things, but one of the projects she looked at was actually using tracers to kind of get a feel for how water was moving through the system. And what she tried to look at each of the different sections of the different kind of restoration styles. And I would point out that the one with the regenerative and that single threaded, that's where they really did that hyperreic, the enhancement with the wood chips and so forth, but not so much in the braided system. And you can start to see that come out in some of the data that she has. So those two upper sections would see a lot more addition to transient storage, but some more absorption that you would see within that tracer, as opposed to when we get to that latter section, which was a bit more of just the transient storage. So it looks like having those wood chips and things in there are adding some enhancements potentially to what they think for some of the water quality with that. And I'll connect that back in just a minute. The other thing that we have up there are signs. So these were signs that were developed between all the different partners in the group. And there was one at the beginning part of the project, or more upstream, and also one more towards the downstream end. Because we do get a lot of folks that jog or walk across this area, and again, being across from the Arboretum. So part of this is just to kind of help folks understand what it is that they're seeing out there and what's in place. So those signs are out there, and if you get a chance to walk by, check it out. It'll tell you a little bit more about not just what's going on in this project, but maybe a little bit more about some of the stuff that we're trying to do on campus. And I put these two up here because we also did some water quality monitoring on them. So one of our faculty members in the Biosystems and Ag Engineering Department has been working with one of his graduate students on this, and he's been looking at some looking at some of the nitrogen and phosphorus moving through there. And some of the stuff that they're seeing is indicating that they're seeing some decreases in both nitrogen and phosphorus preliminarily, and they think part of that's really due to some of that transient storage and potentially some of the biotic and abiotic processes happening. So for us, that's a good chance to use this to help educate students, but also having some of those water quality benefits as well. I put the picture in on the right because Dr. Fryer, who's out of our Earth and Environmental Sciences, he actually uses this stream as well in his hydrogeology class, and it's part of one of their take-home finals. So they use this not just, again, in research and instruction, but it's actually getting used in some assessments for some of our students as well. All right, let's walk to another project. So I've seen this section called by many, many different names. Some of us internally know it as the FEMA project, but we've also seen it as Vaughn's Branch. We'll see it as Big Elm too. So I think the map that we'll pull up there, we'll pull that. A lot of the same partners were on this one, and this one's a bit of an older project comparatively, but just to kind of help orient you, I think most folks know where Kroger Field's at, and then this would be the roundabout that joins Alumni and University. The project area is right in here, which is right at the border of UK's property, where it comes up to some neighborhoods within there. So this site has been used for over a decade for doing class work in it. Pre-restoration all the way, during construction, and all the way through. And it will continue to be done as such because it's a very easily walkable place for a lot of our programs within our college. But you can see how it was before it was restored. It had a lot of challenges with regards to bank erosion. And so right in here was an old service road. So there used to be a service road that connected in there, and it was just blocked off. We had instances where large pieces of concrete found their way in. And so it was, again, just a stream that had lots of different challenges with it. We had lots of utilities that were through there. So before this project could actually be done, they spent about a year just moving utilities around to kind of clear out the space. And what was unique about it and what was great is when this construction was going on, I was teaching one of my stream restoration classes, and this was an opportunity to actually get students out there to see construction when it was happening. Because that's not something that's always easily great timed when you're doing the classes. But we were able to actually work with some of the designers, and this is one of our classes that are out there that day, actually getting to see what they're doing in place. And it involved a lot, as you can tell from this photo, excavating out the valley, rebringing that back, and rebuilding that stream on top of it. And I thought it turned out really, really pretty. It was a nice project. I think it looks really beautiful. Over time, it's grown up a bit more, and you can see a lot more of the flowers come in place with it. As a contrast to the other one, it has a lot deeper pools that are in this one. And so that, as far as the class work, that's just the only part that's a little bit challenging is you can go up at your waist easily in some of those. But it's also been very popular with the community, and it's not uncommon for me to get lots of questions about, like, what flower is this, or what's growing here. I'm not a horticulturalist, so a lot of those I end up forwarding on. But again, this site gets used a lot when it comes to part of our educational mission. So this photo is a lot from one of our stream restoration classes out there doing some surveying. We have our natural resource and environmental science program. We'll use this sometimes when they do some of their camps. We'll come out with it. We teach a course called AFE 100, which is Issues in Agriculture, Food, and Environment. It's a course that all freshmen within the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment must take. And so they get a chance to learn about urbanization and stream health, and this is a good area that they go into. We had the 4-H teen conference where we get thousands of students on campus through 4-H, and so this is an opportunity for some of them to participate as well. And it also gets used a lot within some of our extension areas and outside in the community. So these are students from Redwood Cooperative, and so this is not uncommon to have this site used within our extension program as well, for folks to come out there and do it. So again, it's kind of hitting a lot of those missions that we have, you know, for our education, our outreach, and we have had some of our undergraduate students learn a little bit like the research out there as well, or how do they measure hydrology, or how should they start doing water quality. And I want to shift a little bit to just some of the stormwater stuff, because I think you can't really decouple stormwater management and stream restoration and so forth with it. So on campus, this is actually, you'll hear it called catchments, or a lot of times people might call it farm road rain garden. And this was really a student kind of inspired project. Also was linked with our Tracy Farmer Institute for Sustainability and the Environment. So what started out is this. It was basically a basin that was put in place. This building in the back is our plant science building. And so it was put in place to collect stormwater from the building from that. What would happen is, though, water would enter here, and there was about 0 grade drop before it went out. And part of that reason was it would then go through the parking lot under Gluck building before it would get to Nicholasville Road. So there was all controlled back up, that they couldn't really have that level of elevation change. This became a very popular place for geese. And so what we had was students in one of our graduate level low impact development courses was tasked with, if you were to redesign this side of campus, what would you do stormwater management wise? And one of their ideas was to say, maybe we should change this into a rain garden or something like that. That kind of, I think, got the attention also for Tracy Farmer Institute, and through also at the time, our dean, Scott Smith, was very open to the idea to say, let's try it. We'll let the students help with the design part of it and try it. And so we worked with our biosystems and ag engineering department, and actually were able to work with the students and our landscape architect department and our horticulture department to design this up. So for a while, it was not the prettiest site on there, but before long, we ended up getting that constructed. And so it actually came in to where water would come in, so the students designed an inlet so that water would come in, they could settle out what might be in there. They had 2 basins that water would divert off to the side before coming down a swell there to enter into a 3rd basin. And then we had students involved in all the planting of this. And then also what was the opportunity that came up was, is then there started to be questions of, well, can we start doing research off of it? And so then we started getting undergraduate students interested in learning about doing research. So they measured hydrology in here. So like, what was the inflow of water? What was the outflow? What does the peak look like? We had students that were in soil physics that were interested in where were changes in soil properties between the areas that were wet and dry. We had students in horticulture doing research on plants of that as well. And then over time, as it kind of grew a little bit more, and you can kind of get a feel for what that's like. So that's just, again, the basins when it comes in. It goes down a swell out here and before it goes out. And then our landscape architecture department designed an area where students can sit, put in some native plants as well. So we had, you know, more of that kind of aspects within it. Then we had students generate projects where they could then go present at national conferences off of this as well. So this project was started out with students, and it's been carried through with them to even where they participate in the maintenance of this project as well. So this is one of our freshman courses that was doing that. We found that if you bring food and extra credit, you get a lot of student volunteers. And then the last kind of section I just wanted to kind of highlight and show you all is the other area that we've gotten more interest into with our students was pollinator habitat creation. And on our side of campus, I think we've had a little bit more flexibility in doing this. So we had, for a while, a few years back, one of our living learning programs, so that's where students may be in a residence hall and actually live and participate, did a connected course. And one of the things they wanted to do was establish some pollinator habitat. So we established 6 pollinator gardens on campus, butterfly gardens on campus, that we had some students be involved with how do you design them, procurement, growing of the plants, other ones involved in planting, other ones also involved in creating structures and signage for what these are. So these are ones that you could find around campus. And then we also had a PhD student start to wonder, well, how can you do better on monarch butterfly habitat? And this is a link to his dissertation, but he did a lot of work looking at what was the orientation, and these were just part of his sample set, but looking at the orientation of those gardens, looking at how milkweed was planted within those, looking at predation by European paper wasps. There's a variety of things I got out of that, but they were able to use this as part of their study. And not only having those students create it, but again, we've had students be involved in some of the maintenance, but then Grounds also does a tremendous amount of work with this on there. And then we even have things where there were opportunities created by, well, how do we keep the geese out of the pond? Because we have a lot of geese that like the water of the pond, and this is the pond where that initial Farm Road rain garden I showed you eventually drains into. And then this goes out to Nicholasville Road. And so this was an opportunity for our horticulture club to also grow a lot of plants. And so they grew 9,000 plants to put around this Gluck pond with the idea of, can we also have trees grow up around it to disrupt flight paths, but can you make it so that they can't see potentially as it grows where predators might be? And so if you go by it now, it's a lot more heavily vegetated up. But that really kind of started out with this idea where Grounds connected with us as well to say, can we do something about the geese? And then it got involved with our horticulture club, who the students grew the plants, and then we had other student volunteers out there to bring it in. And then I just want to kind of end up with some other links for you all out there. A lot of the stuff I was able to show you. We have a tremendous amount of publications on our cooperative extension service that are available free of charge for folks. Just highlighted a few on there. We also have a YouTube channel. Dr. Amanda Gumbert does a lot of work also maintaining with that as well. A podcast series, which hasn't got as, we haven't done as much with it as of lately, but that QR code will pull you to a lot of those online publications. And then if anybody wants to reach out or see any of these things, we have our contact information. But again, I want to thank a lot of the folks in this room. I know we're also partners in these projects. They're never things that are done in isolation, but the ones that we are able to put on our campus have been used very heavily in all of our different mission areas that we've had on campus. Well, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Who did the design work on the alumni drive bioswale? Was that done internally to UK, or did you have a contract with engineers?
The first one?
Yeah, the one on the drain pavement.
So Russ, you all, EcoGrow, Ridgewater, Stantec were involved in that one, I think. And Bell Engineering. So Bell did the landscape, Stantec, I think, was part of the design, and you all were part of the construction part of it.
I have a comment more than a question. Maybe,
Yeah.
but, oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. On the business side, it's been pretty tremendous to have, I see Bobby Carey in that photo. So he was one of your students that was at there seeing the construction. I could tell that just seeing that, those kinds of things really sparked students in a way that maybe they couldn't have gotten as much out of just reading from textbooks or seeing videos and things. But on the business end, we hired Bobby, and it was just like a seamless integration to have a new hire come on who already had some exposure, already understood what we were doing and why. So that was a tremendous benefit. And as well, just the research that's been going on. So, as designers or people doing the implementation, we have a better understanding of, how does this actually work? I mean, we might see some, and there's all kinds of stuff subsurface that's going on. You can't even see. So that's just some feedback I wanted to give, that it's been pretty tremendous to have these programs where students are actively kind of hands-on learning and just seeing, but that makes transition into, once they graduate and looking for a job, they've already got some experience, but it's really tremendous on integrating into further work. So thanks for doing that.
I appreciate it. I think you highlighted something really important, and that it's a partnership, and it's a two-way street. So I think you hit a lot of it too. Is some of the questions we get research, maybe ideas that get generated at the university, and we get asked out, and vice versa. We've had a lot of research ideas that have been generated by the community that have come to us and said, we're wondering about this, and then we start digging into the research, going, oh, well, there's not a lot of great answers for that. Maybe we can help figure that back out. And so I do want to highlight that, and I think you make a great point, Russ. It is very much a partnership and a two-way street on these kind of efforts. Again, thank you all very much, and if something comes up, let me know.
Thank you very much. Those of us that have been around a long time, might remember Bell Engineering, I believe, came and did a presentation about the project on Alumni Drive probably a few years ago. Anyway, so now we're going to switch a little bit to a different area, but not too far away, Southland Drive. We're going to have Mark Sanders from here at LFUCG talk about some stormwater improvements on Southland Drive.
Thanks, everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Mark Sanders, Engineering Section Manager for Division of Water Quality. Got the design team with me. It's John Steinmetz with Manx Engineering, Matt Hall with Third Rock, and in the crowd is Stephen Vogel with Strand Associates that he either won or lost paper, rock, scissors, not getting up to present today. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the Southland Park project and give some updates on projects that kind of come from this study. So today we'll talk about the scope on how the project kind of come to be, the modeling and engineering of it, the concepts and iterations that it went through, the planting species and the selections, current conditions, and then we'll wrap up with a summary. For those that aren't aware, the map on the left where the blue star is where the Southland Park is located. Kind of zoom over to the right, a little bit of a blow up. The Southland Park area is the blue dot. Notice the green areas on the map, and the red line going through it is Wolf Run. So now let's go back to 2015, 2016. This is in the heart of the consent decree by both the sanitary group and also the stormwater group. Stormwater group, part of the stipulation of the EPA consent decree was we had to come up with $30 million worth of improvements to meet their demands. Well, these green areas are known drainage or flooding areas that the city's encountered. Well, there's 4 of these areas here. So we like, hey, we need a project. Here's 4 areas. Let's put all these areas into one project and start looking at it as a whole. So now we'll jump forward and then we'll jump back. So now we've got a project. What's going to be our scope? Well, the scope, we're going to start looking at it from upstream of Beacon Hill. So let me see if I can go back. How do you go back? Okay. So Beacon Hill on the map on the right is top left. The kind of to the east, if you want to think of it kind of like a box, Harrodsburg Road, to the right, Nicholasville Road, to the south, Pasadena Drive, to the north, Rosemont Garden. So that's kind of your box, your study area that we're looking at. Within this area, we've had to buy, or the city's had to purchase a couple properties along Furlong, Clays Mill, and Goodrich. The performance criteria that we used for the study to have it evaluated was the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, and a secondary goal of the of the study was if we encountered any sump pumps, take them off the sanitary line. So in 2016, again, we're back kind of mid 15, 16. 16, we come up with a study, put out an RFP. In 2017, we selected Banks, Third Rock, and Strand to do the study. First thing they did, First thing they did was put out a survey to kind of see where the issues was, are we actually getting issues? Well, this is a massive study area. I think they sent out about 5,000 questionnaires. We received back about 800, I think. 200 had reported street flooding, and I think about 50 or 60 reported structure flooding. So we knew that there was an issue now. The red dots and the red squares indicate street and structure flooding. So this map's pretty telling. So from the reported issues, now the design team took off and started coming up with some solutions or some proposals. How do you point? Hold it down. How'd you point at it? You get the bubble up. Hey, okay. This is WGPL. This was and I'll talk about this on the next slide too. This is WGPL. This is the South View area, Southland Drive detention basin. This is Allendale, and down here is our Southland Park project. And you can kind of see this is the Southland Park's kind of broken up into two phases. This is the detention basin, and this is the line, the phase 2 that's being constructed right now. So from the study, these projects came from that. The Allendale Detention Basin, the Southview Storm Sewers, Derby and Regency Drive, Southland Detention Basin, Pasadena, Tucson, WGPL, and the Southland Detention Basin, Southland Drive Detention Basin. So let me give you some updates on where these stand and then a few others. WGPL number 7 was the first one to go through. That one's complete. I think that one completed about 2 years ago now. The Southland Park Detention Basin, which is what we're talking about, finished up last year. The line improvement projects that are going around the park is being worked on right now, and it'll finish up this fall, winter. After that, we have negotiated a number on the Allendale, or Allendale is moving. We're in negotiations on it. After that, we're going to do get some public involvement and then put out a RFP on that one. And then from that, once Allendale, we figure out Allendale, then we'll start looking at some of the others. One that's not on the list, but just kind of in the area, because I know it's a big, or we get asked a lot, is Furlong Drive. And Furlong Drive is, it's also moving. We've got a consultant on board, and it's kind of off and running too. I think with that, I'll let John talk about then we're going back to the park phase 1.
Hot button fishes?
Yeah, it's kind of your button.
Okay. All right. Hi. We were lucky enough during the project to get a 25-year storm pretty much a few months into it, around when we first started. And so that gave us a lot of work to calibrate from. And Steve Vogel of Strand led up the modeling. He and I and some others went out during that storm event and took a lot of photographs, which really helped us during the model calibration efforts. These pictures were provided by residents on Tucson Drive. That's the best photographs we had of the Southland Park area, which helped us calibrate that part of the model. We moved most of the slides on modeling. If any gearheads out there want to talk about modeling, Steve's here to answer the questions later on in the presentation if needed. But this model depicts this slide depicts the existing conditions modeling, and the Southland Drive area, the Southland Park area is here. And basically, the bigger the colors, the worse the existing model, the flooding events. So the park is here, and the Tucson flooding is in this area. Pasadena Drive and Yuma Court flooding was pretty significant. One residence on Pasadena Court, the structure was flooded fairly frequently. Downstream, down around the Longview area, experienced a lot of flooding, but our Southland Park project, the scope was to not worsen any downstream flooding when we made improvements upstream. So looking at the difference between the colored areas here in the Tucson, the flooding, and the Yuma flooding, on the next slide, you can see that they were greatly reduced, and the biggest color, the biggest flooding depths are the red, but that's the filled up detention basins that were constructed in the park. So when we're working with Parks and Rec, this project didn't have to go through any easement acquisition for the Phase 1 project. We're working with Parks and Rec, and we assumed going in that they'd want to have minimal disruptions to the existing park activities. So the first basins we laid up took up open space. Well, first we assumed that they didn't want any work at all. We thought they'd say, stay out of our park, we like it the way it is. We were a little bit surprised when they said, take all the grass you want, we don't want to do a whole lot of mowing. So that's what this is kind of an evolution of our grading plan through there. So that's what I just talked about is number one there. That's what we did in the report. So, they said, go ahead and take our playground and tennis courts because they're really old and we need to renovate them anyway. So we came up with a grading plan for that. Take the tennis court, and then they said, well, we just paved the tennis court about 3 months later, so let's save the tennis court and take the playground. It was getting old. So that's where we kind of ended up. We took the playground, they rebuilt it. We took the basketball court that was by the playground, and it was going to be by the new playground because the proximity of the participants was not really compatible to parental happiness. And so we ended up modifying the grading plan again, and this is what we came up with. You can see the tennis courts are kind of left out of the work. The playground's down here. This would be the new playground. The existing tree-lined area through the park, if you're familiar with it, we tried to save it also. And then we have proposed basins, Basin 1, 2, 3, and 4, we had 4 different stormwater storage areas. And this is the final grading plan that we came up with that met those requirements and still performed hydraulically the flood reduction that we needed. The project also involved some retaining walls that you're seeing some photographs to get the volume we needed, and a relocation of the walking path that came right through the middle of the area. We relocated around in between the basins. The tennis court was left alone, and the playground, which used to be in this area, was relocated to here. And this is the covered shelter that those familiar with the park will be familiar with. So overall, from the performance requirements, we got 8.5 acre-feet of storage. We diverted flow. The current construction of the upstream storm sewer is going to bring flow diverted into the park during flood events. And the storage is going to mitigate that extra flow before it increases discharges downstream. Parks and Rec coordinated the relocations of the playground and tennis courts, and then Mac's going to talk a little bit more about our green infrastructure elements that were included in the project.
Thank you, John. So the design team wanted this to be 2-part, water quantity and water quality. And for green infrastructure, it's great to help improve the water quality, and that's where Third Rock came in here. And this is our site plan for the green infrastructure that was going to be utilized in the project. So here's the, there's the first basin that comes in. There's some pipe that brings in some water through this way, and then this drains into this basin. So both of these basins connect, and then go into an existing stream restoration project here, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. The biggest problem about using a stream restoration or green infrastructure approach in urban environments is the fact that the water that's coming off of the streets or going through the gray lines are very flashy. Typically, if it's just soil, if it's just grass or vegetation, if it's getting high flows at a very high rate of speed into that soil and grass, it's probably going to erode. So we had to do some hardening of our design approach to make sure that the stream restoration was going to maintain where we want it to be. And so the first, coming right off of the culverts here, they go into this basin, and then going through any kind of gray infrastructure, is we have energy dissipation pools. And I'll get into the specific designs on that in the next couple of slides. It goes through a naturally re-meandered stream here with step pool systems, which then goes through some hardened and some small woody debris structures. And then finally, it goes into the existing stream restoration project. So the basin itself, however, we came up with a design filter media to help water infiltrate into the basin, and that will also help the water quality, help with some of the detention, but also just help the design plant species that were going to be there, help have some water there so it's nice and healthy, and helps that reintroduction of vegetation to these basins. You can see the designed media is right here, this kind of like speckled pattern. These rectangular patterns, that's just the existing subgrade, but this is primarily just going to be sand with some compost and some clean topsoil, so that helps the water flow and infiltrate into the system. And then in the center here you can see the designed stream. This is the energy dissipation pool that I was talking about, along with some pictures from construction and post-construction. So flow coming in from the top of the diagram, going south in the diagram, we had some larger rocks at the toe of the slope, along with some rocks at the bank full stage. And then in the middle of it, we have some heavier rocks, some cobble, and a weir rock that we placed where the water goes into the re-meandered stream. This is really heavy duty, and typically on a stream restoration project, you're not going to see this. But we did have to deal with the flashiness of the flow to make sure that the stream, the project would not fail, or this channel would not have any erosion issues. After the energy dissipation pool, we cut back a little bit on just the rigidity of the rock structures, and we had more of a classic design approach to the stream restoration. But you can see here in the upper right-hand corner, that was just after construction, coming out of that culvert there into that energy dissipation pool. And then this is after some of the temporary veg started to take place. Afterwards, we had some step pool structures like I mentioned, and this is one that we use. This is a rock A-vein, and essentially it's called a rock A-vein because it kind of makes an A. We have a little bit of a curved top part of the structure of rock that drops into a little tiny pool and then drops over another set of this A into a larger pool. Primarily this is to help control the flow of the water going through the channel. The biggest erosive factors in the stream, believe it or not, is the water. And so if you can control how fast that water is flowing, you don't have to worry about the stream eroding. And so this was just one way and one of the structures that we used to control the hydraulic slope in the stream restoration project, or this green infrastructure project. You can see in the top right-hand corner it being built, and that was just after some storm flow, so it was nice to see that it was performing. And then after some of the temporary veg here started to take place, that was from the most downstream end of the project. So that's just another picture of the rock A-vein. And then throughout, in between the pools and to the next structures, we had these small woody debris structures. And this is small 4 to maximum 8-inch size small woody debris that we actually put in the channel in between these structures. This helps introduce wood, helps introduce macro habitat into the stream, but it can also help armor the stream with woody debris. And so you can see as it's being put in here in construction in the upper right-hand corner, in between each of the structures, you can see that there's some wood that's been kind of, it's not too complicated. You just put a bunch of wood in there randomly and pound it in with your machine, and it just helps create and reinforce, but also provide some macroinvertebrate habitat. After the temporary seeding took place, it's kind of hard to tell in this picture, but that's kind of what we wanted it to look like, minus all the grass in the channel. And then we wanted to have a native planting plan to put native plants into the basins. But one thing that was really interesting, I mentioned this before, we were tying into an existing stream restoration project. And so to make sure that our planting plan matched up and there wasn't a obvious border where our project ended and the previous one started, we had our biologists go out in the field and walk through and see what plants were established well in the existing stream restoration project, and then we mimicked that in the lower basin. So you can see that the pattern here is a little bit different because each of these patterns represent a planting plan for each of these zones. One thing to point out, and Mark is going to get into it a little bit later in this presentation, but we had this zone here, which is primarily these white spaces. That was zone B, and we designed that to be frequently, or plant species that were more flood resistant, more damp soils that they were going to be used to. And then past that, in the upper parts of the basin, based on the elevation, we pulled back and have more drought tolerant species, species that are used to less water. That way we could help the survivability of the planting plan in this green infrastructure project. Also, we decided to use some container grown trees, as we have seen before in some of our projects. Container grown trees, while they may cost a little bit more up front, have a higher survivability rate. And so we decided to opt for that, and also it would look as if the project was already on its way, as opposed to doing it from tree seeds or bare roots. So you can see here in the upper right hand corner, those are just some of the container grown trees, and they're all native species that we have set out that were implemented into the basin. And then this is shortly after construction. I believe it was in some of the fall, winter months. And you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, but some of those container grown trees without leaves are planted throughout this basin. And then this is just some more channel construction photos as the project was going on. You can see here where the two channels meet in that lower basin. So you can see the head walls up there, along with some of our project or some of our structures, another energy dissipation pool, and then another rock A vein. And it handled a few floods in this photo, or not floods, a few storms in this photo so far. And so we were pretty happy to see that it was staying where we wanted it to be. And then you can see the retaining wall that John was talking about there in the upper picture, and then some retaining water there in one of the pool structures that we had in the project. Some more you can see here. This is a really good photo of the filter media that we designed that we were talking about. It almost kind of looks sandy, like a beach almost. And one thing that we saw when we were out there just doing some general oversight, and also with LFUCG, Mark and Rick, who were there on site a whole lot more, making sure that the project was going well, is that the contractors were actually using their plans. That's typically a good thing when you're putting in some construction, right? That they're actually looking at the plans, and you'd be surprised how much that doesn't happen. So, and with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Mark.
Let me go back one slide just to. Like whenever the contractor was constructing the different features, it was it was impressive just from my eyes to see, because it's a whole lot more art than science. Because, you know, if you're selling a storm pipe, you know, boom, you know, you just keep laying. But, you know, the contractor's having to get almost a specific piece of rock, and almost like a Lego to make fit, you know, and then twist it, you know, next one, twist it. So it was, like I said, it's just
Trying
a,
to figure out how these things work.
oh yeah. But no, here's some pictures, just some, as we wrap up, of the new park, the new trail that was going through. Current conditions, these photos I think were taken last week before. Photo on the top, or the photo on the left is of Basin 1. It's a lot more, I guess the conditions are a lot more wet, so it's a lot more established. Basins, like Mac was saying, this is Basin, I think, 3. So the trees and live stakes are holding really good. We got a tremendous survivability rate. Grass, not so much, because it's just not getting water right now. And that's one thing I wanted to kind of, I guess, hit on is, again, this is a 2-phase project. We had to build the basins before we built the stormwater pipes, so it would have the water, so the water would have a place to go. So that's part of the reason why we're not getting the grass coming in. I mean, so hopefully once we get the phase 2 complete, it'll just help with the grass growth and getting established. Again, you can kind of see the bare spots, those white areas that Mac was showing on 2 and 3. If this is sliders or another one, John. Okay. From this, we just had our 1-year warranty walk with the contractor. Like I said, the trees and live stakes that go along the stream came out really good. The grass, you know, kind of we're figuring out. We've got I guess our action plan is to develop a seed pod where we'll come in October and plant, kind of get just to help the existing seed, and then once phase 2 gets finished, that'll help even more. So it's kind of our plan going forward, and that should happen in October. Cost summary, now this is just for phase 1, so this is just for the detention basin. Our engineer's estimate was 906, low bid came in at 1017, which 10% overage in today's time, not terrible. We had only one change order, and that change order was just widening of the pathway through the park. Park wanted a little bit wider, and it also added a fence around the park, or around the basin. So total construction on just phase 1 was 1043. But again, being 2 phases, phase 2 was, I think, came in at 16, and you add the park and you add design. I think everything in total, this project came to be a little bit over $3 million. So it turned out to be a super good project. Now, just in summary, challenges working within the park. One, you know, we got a lot of eyes. So we got a lot of inspectors, which is a good thing. And we got a lot of really good comments from Ken, Friends Wolf Run, and other citizens just around the park on, you know, hey, how are you guys doing this? How can you do this? This project last year won the APWA Stormwater Project of the Year. Native plantings, like I said, it's going to take a little bit of time to grow in, but once it's fully grown in, I think everybody's going to be tickled. And phase 2 finishes up, like I said, this fall, winter, so when the spring rains come, park will be ready for it. And with that, like I said, or like John was saying, this project had a ton of stakeholders, from people in water quality. You had environmental services. You had parks department. You had the council member. You had Friends Will Run. You had the citizens. So a lot of people communicating went really good. And then our design team, I think, did outstanding. Banks Engineering, John Steinmetz is here, Kyle Hall. Stephen Vogel, Zach Parise with Strand, and Casey Manley, Mac Hall, Rainstorm with Third Rock. And with that, if anybody has any questions?
He has a question if Rainstorm was really someone's name.
Yes.
She's with Third Rock.
Yep.
This is more of a comment, I really liked how this project progressed, particularly the way you handled the public participation component of it. I live like 400 feet away from this project, so if there was a seed that did not germinate, you would hear about it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And your erosion sediment control was exemplary, and I'm also watching the ESC on your pipeline.
Yeah.
And that's doing well as well.
Yeah.
Too, so we were thrilled to have this.
And just want to echo what Ken said, that this project started as a water quantity project. Like, how do we get water off the street, you know, get it into the basins? So it started as a water quantity, but then as it kind of evolved, you know, from public input and then buy-in and support from our deputy director and director, and then support from the council member, you know, everybody said, hey, this is probably a good thing to do. You know, it's a, you know, benefit to the city, benefit to the community. So it kind of evolved into what it is. So, you know, I think early on, we was looking at two old basins from the 1980s, just two bowls. And I think Ken yelled at me a few times that, on that one, but no, it turned into something I think pretty spectacular.
You have a question about the quantity component of this.
Yep.
Is this modeled for the 25-year flood? So what happens when we get a 75-year flood?
Do you?
Okay, when I asked that question of our modeler, he said, well, we'll see, won't we? You know, well, they're often designed for the 100-year flood in terms of.
They're designed for a lot of other storms, but they're designed to overtop at the 100-year flood.
At the 100-year flood in terms of doing that. So that'll be interesting to see when we'll probably have one of those every 5 years.
Yeah. And one thing, you know, on that is, and I kind of like it, it's a challenge, is working on stormwater projects within an urban environment versus working on a project out in the county where you have open ground and you can just build whatever you want to build. A lot of times you have constraints and you can only get what you can get just with the volume that you're given with. So that's what we deal with a lot of times.
Are there other ongoing improvements for the South 25?
The phase 2's finishing up, and then after that, we've got the Allendale detention basin that we're going to start looking at, and that's kind of in the works right now, and that'll probably come to fruition sometime in the spring, just in terms of starting to be designed or evaluated. And construction is still a ways off, but just the process as it's moving forward.
What about the South View?
Southview, oh, well, yeah, just so I don't misspeak at
That one all depends on where we can find land to store water. You gotta get, if you want the water off South Drive, it's gotta go somewhere. There's no land anywhere to do it. Day and age, if anything is available, just I hate to see the price tag on it.
yeah, I think early on we looked at,
Just kinda keep our eyes on things, and if something looks like it may pop up, okay.
yeah,
That one's, I think, will be a pretty one to solve.
yeah, that'll be the toughest one, just because of, kind of like with this one, you gotta have a place for the water to go to before you start installing bigger pipe to get water off the street. So if we can't find a detention basin area or like.
Study had some concepts for it, but
Right.
actually able to see the difference, different story.
Yep. Yeah.
More of a comment or maybe a topic for a future meeting.
Yeah.
But just throughout this presentation, I was thinking about how much the city has really been transformed through stormwater concerns and just beautified.
Yep.
And so I would be interested to see, since the consent decree has occurred, number of projects that are green infrastructure related throughout the city, as a overview perspective.
As a whole.
Because I think that's a tremendous success story to pull all those things together. The city really has been transformed.
Sounds like a good topic for next meeting, which is
Ms. Jennifer?
To further the other projects going on in Wolf Run, we just received notice that we were awarded a 319 grant to address two of the projects that are in the Wolf Run Watershed Management Plan. And these are basin retrofits along Regency Road and Derby Drive.
Any other questions? If not, thank you.
Thank you all very much. I am going to turn it over to Lindsay to talk about the next two agenda items. I have to run away, but Lindsay is fully capable of finishing up the whole. So thank you all. Capable when she's in front of us.
Well, from back here, I'll open it to potential topics for the next meeting.
Got one.
I've got one. Yes.
I think Dr. Kenton Senna has done some soil work related to water quality in the Wolf Run watershed. May be ready to present by the December meeting.
Okay.
But consult with him before you put him on the agenda.
Okay. I don't usually do that. I just throw people
Yeah.
on.
Well, I've got an idea, kind of feeding off of Steve's, and you know, it would be good to see kind of what has the city done since the consent decree. I think it is impressive when you start looking at it. I think something a little further down the road that I think would be interesting too is of all these projects, you know, however much money has gone into it, looking at cost effectiveness, like what kind of projects, what styles of BMPs have had higher performance, lower performance, and maybe as a guideline, since we've got a body of work that's in existence, that would require some sampling and some monitoring of some degree. That might be years down the road, but it'd be interesting to evaluate, again, for stormwater quality incentive grant projects to know which are the higher value return on investment.
There's a lot of revelations happening with green infrastructure too on the maintenance side. We're processing through that as we speak, and so, yeah. Bring this group in on the discussion, but we don't have all the answers right now. Well, since we started a little late, so we're running just a little over, I'll try to get everybody out of here, but just a few announcements. I won't make Jennifer come up and read off the slides, so I'll do my best to go through some of these, but a lot of these are to environmental services, but we've got the due date for Art by Nature submissions is coming up on September 15th. You want to say anything about KWRI's annual symposium?
September 15th, so registration closes today.
So come on out if you're interested. Where is it?
It'd be at Central Bank Center.
Okay. Nature Hop is September 17th. Tree Week's coming up October 6th through 15th. Art by Nature is the 6th annual, the 17th is the 6th annual Nature Hop. And it's a way for the community to enjoy natural areas of Fayette County. There's a lot of free activities open to the public and a lot of integration with stormwater quality as well. And like submissions. Double Grease Toss is the 24th, right after Thanksgiving. Our next meeting will be on December 1st, probably here again. And then just a plug for December 8th will be our workshop for the engineering, development, and construction industry. That's our annual workshop where we're able to training, talk about ESC, and get into some nitty-gritty there as well. much for coming. We had a really good list of presentations today, and I think